Welcome to the Startup Grind.
But I just knew that I wanted to get out of Vermont. My father had two jobs his whole career. He was in printing. He was an operations guy. He hated salespeople, which that's eventually what I sort of went into. But I sort of swindled my way into Brown University and never really looked back. I felt like as though I'd sort of joined the world that I saw on TV. I was a history major that through college I spent 2 days working for College Pro Painters, and the manager made me site manager, and I was like, I'm doing all the work here, and I'm like, there's no rocket science going on here. So when the neighbor came over and asked if I would give her an estimate for her house, I was like, I went over at lunch and gave her an estimate for the house, called up a buddy of mine from New Hampshire, and we painted the house. And so then I was an entrepreneur. And so every summer I would go way in the black, and then during school I go way in the red, and the more in the black I went, the more in the red I would. So when I graduated in '92, which went into what was then called a recession, this is pre-tech bust and real estate crisis and everything. I owed people money. I mean, I didn't just own school loans. I mean, I owed individuals money. So I had to get sort of a corporate job. And I was a history major, and I actually got myself into sort of an analyst program at what was then called Chase Manhattan Bank. And I wasn't totally thrilled. I didn't view it as I had any choice. I mean, I had to make real money, and, but the prospect of basically, renting a studio apartment with two other people, and working 120 hours a week was really not super high on what I wanted to do. So a friend of mine, and that was in my fraternity, was having a hard time finding a job. And so I sort of took him through the process. I'm like, well, you got to go to these open houses. I'm like, here's one, OpenSoft. I'm like, sounds like Microsoft. Let's go check it out. And the guy doing the presentation was, all the banker things I went to, it was like, guys in their 30s, that were still, had no authority. And this guy was like 26 years old. He was like, I run marketing for the company. I was in Hong Kong last week, and I was like, dude, I'm like, what do you do? Like, this sounds awesome. And we ended up luring the guy back to our fraternity, got him all liquored up, and more entrepreneurialism. And he was just like, you should interview tomorrow. I'm like, what? I don't know anything about technology. He's like, doesn't matter. And he's like, neither do I. And I was like, oh, this is unbelievable. There's a world out there that I could live in. And so I ended up going up to Boston, getting the job, and moving to Boston, and still didn't know how to describe to my parents what I was going to be doing or what, how it was done. I was like, but they're making money, and it doesn't seem like it's a scam, so I'm in. Maybe even if it is a scam, let's check it out. And I was a history major, so they put me in sales, and I don't think that they thought that it was the guy who started the company had formerly been an MIT professor, and he was a total school snob. He was just hiring people right out of top schools. In fact, I used to get made fun of all the time because I went to Brown, which was like where they didn't have grades. I'm like, yeah, okay, here we go. And but we ran this sort of education class that had sort of a software that we sold, and it was pre-internet, so I'm old. And we were sort of pitching like that information technology shouldn't just be a cost center in your organization. There's ways to make money. And back then that was like an epiphany to all the pretty big companies, and we sold through the big hardware partners. And I sold through HP, which mainly they had their main customer base on the West Coast. So so I ended up 18 months later moving to the West Coast, sort of following the wave. And I was the first remote employee. I was the sales guy that had territory on the West Coast. And The 90s were my 20s, and I was in sales. And the tech boom was everything that people talked about. It was lunacy. I mean, if you could spell internet, you could get a job, and if you could, if you could code internet, you could start a company and get funded and do crazy things. It was madness, and it was awesome. And I was just a sort of a sales mercenary. I would just go from company to company. I'm like, which one of these companies is going to make me rich? I can hit a number. And that's something that a lot of these people can't do, because I had had sort of 4 or 5 years more than someone who had just graduated from college experience, real corporate sort of cold calling, corporate experience, and so I could usually run circles around these startup sales teams, and so at any rate. The 90s were kind of a blur, and I traveled a lot, spent a lot of money, did a lot of great things. But then 2000 came along and the tech bust, and I met my now wife, and she was working for a technology company in Boston, and we kind of had a cross-country romance. And meanwhile, our whole industry is going to hell in a handbasket. And I said, well, I've been wanting to travel on my own. I would take trips. I would take 3 months off here and drive cross country and, go through the Cascades and do different things. And I was like, I want to do a big trip. And I actually don't know exactly when the point where it was just all of a sudden decided that she was coming too. So we took off and we traveled for the entire year in 2001. And while we were gone, September 11th happened. And San Francisco was a very different place when we got back. And it was like, okay, we've got to start our life. It's like we're going to get married and we're going to have kids and do all the normal stuff. But it was like, I'm like, am I going to have a hard time getting a job? And I actually went to work for a friend of mine, a guy that I had worked on the same sales team with. And after about 3 months, it was selling email marketing software I did large accounts like Cisco and Microsoft and some of these big accounts, and I was just, after about 3 months, I was like, this sucks. I'm like, this is terrible. I'm like, the environment's not that bad. I can find better jobs. And he was like, I totally agree with you. Don't leave yet. He's like, I want to start a company, and I want you and I should start a company. And I was like, okay. And I was open to that because I was staring down. It wasn't enough to just be in California at that time. My now wife was pregnant, and it was like, I can't just be the top sales guy at these fleeting companies. It's like I got to own the means, or I got to inherit some money or win the lottery, because I got to buy a house and do all your sort of normal things that would just inaccessible to someone that's not making $250,000, or probably is higher out there. I mean, it's just housing prices are just, it's unbelievable. So anyway, I'm like, okay, so I'm open. We're going to go for it. And we were sales guys, and that's what we knew. And so we just started thinking about, and actually the idea for Jigsaw hatched out of a failed idea that we had. And it's when we were sort of going over the idea, and he was just, basically we were going to get non-competing salespeople that were remote. In other words, they worked for companies that were based somewhere else, to all be in the same office, so they could use the same printer and same network and have a place where they could strut around when they sold deals and complain about, and because salespeople are pretty social. That's kind of what we're thinking. But we couldn't really come up with a business model that worked. It's like, who's our customer? Is it the sales VP that wants to keep tabs on the salespeople? And I was like, I don't want any part of that. And then, or is it the salespeople themselves? And so anyway, that we're like, we're not going to make any money doing this. And so we were going over the idea, and Jim Fowler was the guy's name, and Jim said, well, okay, and these guys are non-competing, and they're probably all calling on the same group of decision makers anyway, so they can use the same CRM system. We can have one instance of Salesforce, and they can all use it. And I was like, that's interesting. I'm like, keep talking. And he literally, over the next 3 hours, and I always get goosebumps when I say this because it's absolutely true, he just spit out the idea for Jigsaw. And basically, without any real functional changes, was the company that we sold, which this never happens. I mean, there's always pivots, and it's basically that a lot of the same terminology and everything, and the same core idea was what we sold 8 years later to Salesforce. So anyway, sorry, I answered a bunch of questions Jim asked you.
No, trust me, it makes my job a lot easier. Keep talking. All right, so Jigsaw. How'd you go about getting funding for that once you had the idea and you guys knew that it was a good idea?
Yeah, that's a great question. It certainly was not magic. The underwear fairies didn't come and show up and give us a whole bunch of money. But the next best thing, Jim's stepdad was a wealthy tax attorney and corporate tax attorney, and he was like, I'll put in. He's like, if you can find some other sucker to put in $100,000, I'll put in $100,000. And so Jim had another sort of mentor guy that was he was a very early investor in Cisco. You may have heard of them, and just a lot of money. And he was just like, sure, I'll throw $100,000 at this idea. And so we had $200,000. That wasn't enough because both of us had just gotten married, bought houses, and had kids, and lost all our money in the market when the tech downturn. And I hadn't worked for a year to top it all off, and so it was like it was. So we not only do we not have our own money to put into the idea, we couldn't even go without salaries. I had a $6,000 mortgage. My $1 million trailer that I lived in out there, and so we've got the $200,000, and then we had some introductions to some pretty big names VC companies, and we had worked. Most of the companies that we had worked at were VC funded, so we knew that that's how it works out there, for the majority of companies, and we couldn't go try to get debt funding, because we would have to pay it back. I mean, we could basically sell ourselves into indentured servitude for an idea, and you have to assume when you start a company that's going to fail, because that's what happens to 95% of these companies. They fail. Don't believe what you read and you hear on Twitter or whatever. It's like most of these companies are going to fail, so you've got to be protected. And then and going out and getting money from relatives or friends, it's like, you want to sign up for a big ration of crap every Thanksgiving for the rest of your life. It's like, well, that's when you spent my $100,000. So, that's what steered us into the just the abuse land of VCs. So we got laughed at. I got us physically escorted out of one of the big name brands. Because basically I was like, you did not listen to a word we said, and they were like, yeah. I'm like, Jim's like, come on, there's nothing for us here. And they did. They regretted it because the next round they came back. So we got our comeuppance, but it was hard. It was, the entire world had crashed, and actually all the VC companies, they were doing, through 2002, they were doing things like zero new investments. They would make add-on investments to companies they were already in, some of them, but they were so gun-shy that they were doing, in fact, they were getting in trouble from their LPs. They were like, what are you guys doing? What do we have all our money with you? And they were just like freaked out. They were like, oh my God, we've just lived through this. So we're just starting to come out of that when we were going around for money. And it was two sales guys, never been CEOs, and we had an idea. We had a PowerPoint presentation, with a couple of sort of hand-drawn pictures of essentially of like what it was going to do. And so we were able to take some money. We took $550 from this company called Austin Ventures, which is no longer solvent, but which is amazing because they made a ton of money on Jigsaw. But they put in $550, and then we had the 100, so we took $750. And for that, we gave away 40% of the company, and then they made us put together a 20% option pool, which is on the high end of normal. And so essentially 60% of the company is gone for $750,000. So looking back on it, it would be, I I'd be I'd be web conferencing in from my helicopter if we had not, if we had put our own money in, because we would have kept all that equity. But that's not how it went down. But I don't begrudge the system or regret it, because without that money, there's no Jigsaw. Like Jim and I go get sales jobs, and basically just continue doing. You had to, we had to go for it. We had to kind of risk it, and. So anyway, that basically gave us about a 6 to 8 month runway, and essentially it was like all the mandate was get the website up and going, and see if salespeople, marketing people, business people would put their contacts into the system, because most people didn't think, they're like, why would salespeople give you their leads? And we were just like, we're not asking people to give us their leads and their relationships. We just want the business card information so that other people can. There's no implicit relationship in here. In fact, all the users are anonymous to each other. It's like we're just building this big directory. So we, it was sort of the we went to a big .com graveyard, I called it. It was this big warehouse in Oakland where two VC companies had basically, when their .coms that they invested in went belly up, there's all this furniture, and they just shoved it into a warehouse. And so we were just like, we got a marble conference table for $50. We got chairs, like these name brand, like, leather chairs and stuff for like $60, piece. And we spent $1,000 at the .com warehouse, and set up in some totally ghetto space and down in San Mateo, and we were off and running. And in fact, there was downstairs. There were like youth groups that were meeting down the hall, and like Noda Republics and a whole bunch of shady guys that we didn't really know what they were doing. Import, export. You're like, and one of these fly by night. When you get a call and they're like, oh, we have $1,000 trip to wherever, that you win if you just need to do this. And they were selling that stuff down, swindling old people. And it was like, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe we're here. So, but that's how we set up shop. And we had basically, and somebody fired a gun, and we had 6 months to get this website up and going. And neither one of us could code. And so we went to a company that Jim had worked for, that had raised a bunch of money and then was kind of slowly going out of business, and they had a lot of developers that were sort of on the bench. And we're like, look, you come develop this thing for us, and we'll pay you half market, and and then and the other company's still paying you, and then and take some equity. And there were already developers out there that had burned by equity. All this, that basically spelled, after the tech bust, that was like, yeah, you want me to work for free? That's what you want. And I'm like, no thanks. And so we didn't have to do that. And these three guys, powered this one guy, really. And that's, a lot of times that's how it is. Even in companies that have 40 developers, you always look for the one guy. Like when the website falls apart, when the mobile app goes down, who are you going to call? And you'll find that it's one person, and half the time that guy dropped out of college, or high school, and he's the man, he's the, or she, they're the coding person. And we had this one guy, Rajan, who's just, he's just genius. So at any rate, so a few things went right for us, and we got the website up and going in 5 months, and we went into sort of a beta period, and it didn't Facebook catch fire, but it caught fire in the B2B world. It's like salespeople found out quickly. And the main reason was we had something that you could not get, that salespeople were spending a lot of their time trying to, if your company had a $100,000 a year membership to Hoover's or Dun & Bradstreet or Info Group, then you could get some sort of contact information, but you couldn't get email address, and it was very difficult to get below the C level in the company. It's like, so if you're a manager, you're in sales, and your manager comes to you and is like, we should be selling to Cisco. You could go on Hoover's if you were lucky enough to have that account, or you could, if you were a real small company, you could go on Google and you could find Cisco, John Chambers, CEO, here's the 800 number. And it's like, and the ability Like when you hire an admin who's answering the phone at your company, the first thing they learn is how to operate the phone, and the second thing they learn is how to get rid of salespeople. You know, it's like the days of sort of dialing for dollars and with general numbers and calling up and asking questions about who runs this and who does that, they were over. They were already over by that point. You needed their email address. You needed to be able to, an entry point into the company. And we were providing that. We were providing it for free because we were trying to get people hooked on it. And I hired 3 guys off Craigslist to call into a list of inside sales managers. Sometimes we just have people go right through the website. I'm like, just call into sales, act like you're a customer, and flip the call. Get to the manager and just be like, does your team have all the leads that you need? And there isn't an inside sales manager out there that's going to say, you know. And I would stand over them, and when someone would start to say it, I'd be like, really? I'm like, should I call the VP? You know, sometimes I would know them. You know, I'm like, should I call Bill and tell him that you've got all the leads you can handle? You don't want them? I'm like, you would pay for my Rolodex. Never mind this collective that we've put together. And we just hand cranked it like that for a couple of months, built it up to we had about 3,000 members, and by this point we were starting to get calls from big companies. You know, they were like, I want everybody on my sales team, you know, memberships to Jigsaw, and it went from there. And throughout the time, and then we went for another round of funding, and that conversation was quite different because 8 months had gone by. VCs were getting pressure from their LPs to make investments, so then there was a very small number of like viable deals, you know, people that had revenue, that had a name in the market. And we were trying all sorts of crazy marketing ploys even then, you know, to just try to get our name out. And we were always a little ahead of the curve. People thought we were much larger than we were, and that was by design. And whenever technology came out, you know, LinkedIn was starting to catch on. We started getting on LinkedIn, and you know, you know, we were early on Twitter. We did some really pioneering things with SEO, and we would try anything. We dressed up as the founding fathers and went out on Haight-Ashbury and declared the Declaration of Data Independence, and filmed the whole thing. We were like asking homeless guys, you know, like what they thought about paying for company data, and it was just a big thumb in the nose to the big data companies. We had a guy dress up in a dinosaur costume because we called D&B and Info Group the data dinosaurs, like doing things the old way, and you know, just constantly. And it was, you know, it got like 10,000 hits, which in the grand scheme of thing wasn't, but it got a lot of the right hits. In fact, Dun & Bradstreet gave us a letter of intent to buy the company, and we sat down with their CEO for the first time, and he was like, he's looking at me, and actually it was Movember, so like now I had already shaved out my beard, and I had like a Kentucky waterfall with a big huge like pointed like sideburns. And he was like, first thing he said to me, he was just like, I just can't stop looking at this. He's like, do you look like this all the time? I'm like, no, it's like Movember or whatever. I'm like, also we're having a mustache contest on the site, you know, like all the community members. I'm like, you know, that's just stuff that we do. And he's like, oh, like the video that you did where you called us dinosaurs. I'm like, yeah, exactly like that. He was like, you guys are crazy, you know. And it was like, yeah. And we would try anything. We would do anything, and try not to get taken by. We do the test and invest. You know, we would do anything with anybody for a small amount of money and try it out. And if it worked, you know, that's what the squeaky wheel got the grease, and that's how we were. And we were always trying to think of new ways, and we were just happening on things that, you know, and you know, so many things had to go right though, like timing. We sort of rode everybody thought we were a social network when social networks were really hot, and we were like, yeah, great, you know, call us whatever you want. If you want to put us in an article, you know, we'll go speak at your thing. And then sort of the Web 2.0 user-generated content, and we got in really with from sort of an intellectual point of view of we read The Wisdom of Crowds and crowdsourcing, and we sort of overnight we became a real viable example of that. And like, oh hey, a company that's using crowdsourcing to make money, and which were sort of few and far between. And you know, we would try every angle, but so many things had to go right. You know, it's just, I mean, people have this image of like, oh, you founded Jigsaw, like you invented Jigsaw, and then it was just all, you know, rainbows and pots of gold, and like that's just not how it worked. I mean, so many things had to go right, and we had to kiss so many frogs and step in so many potholes, and you catch so many waves and so many breaks, and and in order for, and that was to sell the company in 7 years, you know, which is, that's not a small amount of time. In fact, for the first 4 or 5 years of our existence, our VCs would pound us. We had board meetings every 6 weeks. I mean, nightmare. You know, it was like the board circus, you know, because like they had things that they wanted to hear, and you had to kind of not lie to them, but you kind of had to paint things correctly. And we were doing well. I can't imagine the companies that weren't doing well. And they were always like, when's the hockey stick coming? You know, it's like, when do you guys blow up and, you know, everything's golden? And we were just like, look, you know, we're doubling revenue every year. We're doubling the data every year. You know, like it's sort of linear growth, you know, it's up. Well, then 2008, you know, comes along and companies are going out of business. Then nice, steady up and to the right was the new, you know, black dress. We were just like, woo! And Dun & Bradstreet gave us an offer to buy us. We shopped that deal. We weren't quite ready to sell. We thought we could still get more value out of it, and they ended up pulling the offer sort of at the board level. I don't think they wanted to part with. Dun & Bradstreet is based in Short Hills, New Jersey, and I think, you know, seeing their neighbors, hedge fund owners and Lehman Brothers guys, you know, let out of their houses, and, you know, maybe they didn't want to part with $100 million, and which makes sense. And that actually, we found out that news the day that Obama got elected. And I try not to associate those two things, but you're like, and so then at that point, I'm jumping all over the place, but you can just cut in.
No, you're fine.
So meanwhile, I've got you know, I now have 2 kids, and they're getting close to school age, and I'm starting to look around California. I'm like, it's kind of a crappy place to raise kids. You know, I mean, there's a lot of social problems that derive from the pure population density, and you know, just everything's crazy. I mean, it's just broken. Like there's so many sort of broken systems, and you can only sit in traffic. You know, I had a 3.8 mile commute, and you know, and that can only take an hour so many times before you're like, I hate it here. You know, you're just like, and you know, and drive. I used to drive up and down 101. And like look at all the houses, you know, all the houses crammed all together. I'm like, every person in this house has more money than me because they can afford a house. You know, you're just like, I'm like, this is ludicrous. And all my friends that had, you know, a lot of them had tried San Francisco for a while, but then when they sort of coupled off and moved on, they were like, I'm going to move back to the city where I came up with, or I'm going to try a new place where it's more economically feasible to have like a normal life. And you know, people be like, "Oh yeah, you know, I'm a teacher. My wife's a part-time accountant, and you know, we got a house, we got a lake house, and you know, it was like, this is crazy." You know, I'm like, "What? How much does it cost to live here? And what beyond the weather am I paying for?" And so this was what was going through my mind. And my wife grew up in Boston, and I grew up in Vermont, as I said, and I was just like, you know, I went from being like, don't think I'm ever going to move from San Francisco to leading the charge to move. And I didn't care where we moved, but my wife wanted to move back in the same time zone where all our relatives were, which makes a ton of sense. And I was like, well, I don't want to. She was like, I want to move all the way to the East Coast. And I was like, well, I don't want to live where there's winter. She's like, me neither. So then it was like, whoop. And I was like, well, I got to live in a city, you know, because chances are I'm going to be commuting to whatever, you know, job that I might get or whatever. And so then it was DC, Atlanta, Charlotte, and like the RTP area. And I was like, well, we don't want to move from one rat race to another. So Atlanta and DC were out. And so very quickly in one conversation, we sort of were like, and we had some friends that had moved to Charlotte. So we called them up and we, you know, and they were like, yeah, awesome. And we visited like twice, and wham, we were put our house in California up for sale. And so we moved here. But that was under the assumption that D&B was going to buy us. So when they pulled that offer, I was already pot committed to move, and I wanted to move. And so we moved to Charlotte before we sold Jigsaw. But and I actually moved on the last $7,000 that I had on any credit card. I had maxed out all my credit cards, which was a decent amount of money. And it was like, I mean, it was very touch and go, but literally the first month we were like in the black because we went from, you know, I ditched the aforementioned raising $6,000 mortgage and, you know, it was in a rental house, you know, big old house and you know, in Myers Park, and just a lot of expenses went down just immediately. And I was cutting into the debt immediately almost from day one. And we just love Charlotte, and we still do. I've been here 5 years. So there. Ask another question, see how long I talk.
Oh, I love this. I mean, I shouldn't even written down any questions. But all right, so during all that time, it sounds, you know, you're obviously busting your ass during all of this, working nonstop. How do you avoid the burnout when you're trying to do Jigsaw.com or any other project that you do?
Well, when we started Jigsaw, Jim and I mean, we weren't 18. I mean, we were in our early 30s. You know, we had worked for several companies, and we said, we're like, look, we're not going to, we both had babies, you know, and it was like, we're not going to completely sacrifice our lives to this company, you know, to the company. It's like, you know, we're going to, obviously there's crises, there's things, but just the normal pace is not going to be 18 hours a day. That's just not how it's going to be. And then we were also, we're like, we're not going to hire any assholes. And, you know, sorry to swear, but that's the word we used, because we had worked in sharp-elbowed companies, and we're like, life's too short, you spend all your time, like, we had just a zero tolerance for, you know, for people that weren't, you know, gracious and, you know, and had their head on straight. And we're like, we're not going to work people into the ground. And through that whole period, and when my baby came along about a month after we released the site, he was sort of acid reflux, you know, just sort of generally cranky to not be in the womb, I guess. And so he didn't sleep really. So that meant I didn't sleep. So all I did was work. And, but after that period, I was home for dinner 4 nights out of the week, and I didn't work on the weekends that much. And, you know, and we made it a point, and we would go later on, you know, we would go through where the developers were and be like, everybody leave. Everybody's gone. Nobody's working this weekend. Nobody's staying, you know, and it's like, and there were people that were like, that was the only environment they had known. And we were just like, well, we don't care. You can go work yourself to death somewhere else, because that's not what we're doing. We also, almost from the start, those 3 guys I hired on Craigslist, after a month, I couldn't hold on to those guys, because they were getting offers from Oracle. You know, they were selling a $25 a month subscription that we paid them, you know, a bounty of $25 a piece, you know, and like very low salary. They were getting like $150,000 offers from Salesforce and from other companies that they were calling into. Couldn't hold on to them. So we outsourced up to Post Falls, Idaho, which is right outside of Spokane, Washington. And we started hiring up there initially for sales, inside sales and customer support. And then eventually anyone that we could hire up there, any job that could be done, you know, data operations and stuff like that. And that turned out to be really, and the reason I bring that up now is when I would start to get burned out, you know, in sort of startup land, we would go up there and it was like, those guys just bled Jigsaw blue. I mean, it was like every day was a party because they got to work for Jigsaw. I mean, they loved it. They loved it, and it was totally infectious. We'd go up there, I'm like, God, these guys like love us, love Jigsaw, you know, because they were, you know, their jobs before. One of our top guys, he was like, yeah, I worked for a repo man before. He was like effectively stealing people's cars. He's like, they'd shoot at me. And he was like, and then a couple people had worked at Verizon. He was like, your approach to customer support is like the exact opposite. You know, he's like, if someone got irate or whatever, I'm like, send them down to me, I'll talk to them, you know, and we were always like that. We were always very accessible, and you know, it put people, they'd call up so pissed, you know, this data was this, and I'll be like, yeah, I'm Garth, I co-founded the company, you know, how can I help you? And they were like, well, I'm like, okay, well, this is how we're going to fix that. And I was like, don't ever yell at anybody. Don't ever, don't just be nice as pie. Don't take personal abuse for a second, but, transfer it to me. But that was great for burnout, like to go up there and just hang out on the floor, with everybody on the phone, and they'd have ping pong tournaments, and it was beautiful up there. We did all our corporate outings up there. We'd go, mountain climbing and, these huge bike rides, go shooting, it was so awesome because our office, we used to do video links between the two offices like once a week. And we had marketing, most of the executives, marketing, and the engineers were down in Silicon Valley and San Mateo, and then, sales, and we would always laugh because the San Mateo office was like the United Nations. We had like Iranian women and, just all flavors of people. And then up there, they'd be like, let me guess, we hired three people, guys, 32, goatee, chubby, jigsaw hat, and they'd be like, hey guys, I'm Matt, I'm Bill, I'm going to be covering this territory. And so we'd send people we tried to, mix and match. And usually it was people from San Mateo going up there. And, and it was like, I remember this one woman in particular, she was from India, like literally had just come to the United States like 4 or 5 years before to go to business school. And then this was like her first job. And we sent her up to Idaho, and they took her out drinking, and she had the Helga hat, which was like a Viking hat with like Helga like hair, and she's like, oh, just like, these guys are so crazy, It was really pretty fun, but that was really awesome for burnout. But so 2 things, like going up there and then just not agreeing to put up boundaries, that we're just, there's always going to be a crisis. There's always going to be, there's always 50 things that you could do. But if it wasn't going to take the company down, then we could do it tomorrow.
Perfect. So why don't you tell us about the exit of Jigsaw? So you moved out here to Charlotte. You said that, when were you approached by Jigsaw? Because you were talking about another company. When were you approached by them, and when did you decide to sell?
Sure. So 2008 was when Dun & Bradstreet gave us the letter of intent, and then we shopped the deal, which means we hired an investment bank, and they went out and approached other companies to see if they might want to buy us. And we learned a lot, about the market, and and then it started to get in our head like, hey, we would much rather not sell to a data company. It's like, we're a data company plus, we've got this online component, and, it's, and we're starting to get connected to CRM companies and, the usage of the data and applications as opposed to just a data company. And that's when we were always involved. We knew lots of people that worked at Salesforce, and they had an M&A group, and then they had, sort of a revolving door of executives. But what happened was you needed to get to Mark Benioff if anything was going to happen. And we learned that over, the years. But at any rate, so then I sort of made, this summer of 2008, I sort of made the decision that we were going to move. And then in November of 2008, they nixed the deal. They lifted the offer. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to move anyway. So it took me a while to sell my house in California. And then I moved in the summer of 2009. And in my mind, I was like, okay, we're going to have to get through this. Nobody's going to come along and offer us a multiple on revenue, anything close to what we'll accept until the country gets through this sort of crisis. And who knows? I'm like, it's going to be, it's probably going to be years. And in fact, I had a discussion with my co-founder, who was my CEO. It wasn't a 50-50 relationship because he brought all the money and he thought of the idea, and he wanted to be CEO. He was just like, look, like you can't run biz dev, and you're sort of giving up a seat at the executive table a little bit. He's like, you're still the founder, and I still had all my shares and everything like that, but it was like, you can't do this from across the country, forever and ever and ever. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm like, okay, well, think of this as a year, like I'm going to do this for a year. So when I moved here, I hit the ground running. Like, I need to see what's here, because I need to figure out what I'm going to do next. And I wasn't that sad about it. It was kind of like talking about contact information for 7 years. It was the longest I'd worked at any company by like a factor of 3. And, because usually I just sales guy, just put on my new hat and sell my new product and then move on to the next one. And and then I remember it was Christmas of 2009 where our COO, we hired this guy, this chief operating guy who was nails. He was an incredible operator, and he was instrumental in getting Dun & Bradstreet to issue that offer. And then he had been banging on the Salesforce door, over and over and over, and he was and he got through. I mean, he essentially got through to, Mark Benioff was thinking about this concept of a data cloud, marketing cloud, sales cloud, service cloud. And he was like, data cloud. And it makes sense. And he actually had approached LinkedIn and was like, okay, you should give us API access and we should sort of merge this. And they were just like, LinkedIn they think of the whole world as a walled garden. Everybody else is trying to break in, so they were like, no, we can't do that. And we were like, we could do that. You could own us. We own all the data. And that started the conversation. And it happened very quickly. So effectively 9 months after I moved here, we sold. And we didn't shop the deal this time. In fact, we both used the same investment bank. And, we had to get another one involved, but they were just involved so it wouldn't be sort of monopolistic. I mean, we were basically, we trust you, we negotiated the deal. It was an all cash deal. It was 142 million in cash. It wasn't a stock deal, and with about a 15% earnout and an escrow. So it ended up, the deal was which basically we had a year to hit this real softball number, and then they would release the rest of the money. And then there's a 10% escrow. So, and then we all got tied down for a year, so we had a 1 year earnout. And none of the executives they named about 15 people in the company that couldn't leave, and I was one of them. And so, but I was on record, and so was Fowler, and so were most of the executives look, we're not going to work for Salesforce. So, so for a year, all I really did was, I really tried to look out the best I could, particularly for the people up in Idaho. It was just it was either a good thing for you or it wasn't, and if it wasn't, then okay, let's parlay. You're marketable right now. You work for Salesforce, it's, let's parlay this into a great opportunity. Or if it was a good thing for you, let's get you introduced in the organization. You can start to, it's more political in nature, and the old startup days where you're not going to be calling up Mark Benioff and being like, hey, come wear the Helga hat. It's like you got to look out for yourself. And then I also would go to marketing shows and essentially just tell the Jigsaw story, because people liked hearing it and I like telling it, and I like going to trade shows and with no real goal, and stand up for half an hour and then get drunk for 4 days. I was like, all on Salesforce. It was fun, I used to literally, I would try to get them to say something, when I would put in my expense reports, just limos, I'm paying for everybody on this side of the box. And it was really fun. I mean, I highly, highly, highly recommend it if you can get yourself in a situation like that, because it was fun. And I thought that my plan was not, I'm going to jump right into another startup. But fortunately or unfortunately, I met someone who is more than a friend and a business partner. He's really one of my mentors here in Charlotte, and I met him for the first time about 3 weeks before we sold Jigsaw, and then and then he gave me about 3 months, and then we sat down and we started talking about a company that we might like to start, and then in fact during the earnout, by the time the earnout was done and I stopped being a full-time employee of Salesforce, I was spending all my time at this company OtherScreen that I started, which was it wasn't related to contact information at all. It was a second screen app, basically an app that you play on your phone or your computer or your iPad while you watch live television. And it was sort of a game. You know, we would send trivia, and we would have something that we actually called a VJ, a video disc jockey, basically, who is watching the same event that you are and is pushing out content. Like for a sports game, we would be like, we would push out what we call propositions, like, you know, is Michael Vick going to score a touchdown before the first half, or, you know, are the Chargers going to win, or, you know, whatever. And then we did it for reality shows. You know, we'd be like, is so and so going to get the rose, or, you know, and we had fun doing it. It was a ton of work. We didn't really have any connections in media or whatever, so it was a lot of cold calling by me to try to get opportunities. But it was fun. But and we had some early success. We thought we had put together a platform. It was a second screen platform for TV stations, local TV stations, and we got Fox Charlotte to be our customer by basically just camping out over there and just doing everything for them, and, you know, for like $1,000 a month or something. And you know, it was hardly a repeatable process. But we went out and got some funding. We raised $1.5 million, and it was tough. I mean, it was hard. You know, we wanted it to be all Charlotte money, and we wanted it to be sort of a syndicate. You know, like where to have our dream situation would have been like 5 or 6 different investors put in $250,000. You know, in addition to the money that we were sort of the seed investors. What we ended up doing was going to a friend of Chris's in Austin, because he made a lot of his money in his early career at Dell, and so he had a lot of friends out there. So we went to a VC company there, and they put in $500,000, and then we've got a couple of other local folks to add to kind of the syndicate. But well, the big thing was we wanted a Charlotte success. It's like Charlotte money, Charlotte. You know, everyone works here in Charlotte. You know, because that would reverberate through the environment. You know, it's and that's what I believe that Charlotte needs. People are like, oh, there's no money. That's bullshit. There's money all over the place. They just don't know. They didn't make it investing in startups. So, you know, someone has to kind of show them the way. You know, world-class university, like whatever. There's world-class universities all over the place. People will move here. It's an awesome place to live. People will move here if there are jobs here. People will move here if there's opportunity here. You know, there's people bring up other things. There's nothing about Charlotte that says you can't have a success here. But there has to be some successful companies. Also, you build a company. I mean, we got up to 5 people. We had 3 developers and you know, and the 2 of us in OtherScreen. And had we been successful, or even moderately successful, even as it worked out, those guys just didn't go back to what they were doing. You know, they were just like, hey, you know, I can be involved, and successful companies beget all sorts of other successful companies, and you know, and that's, so I'm trying to do anything I can do to help anybody that, you know, thinks they might be able to put together a Charlotte success. It's doable.
Awesome. And you're working with another company now called CircleBack, and you're still staying in the mobile application sector. So can you tell us a little bit about CircleBack?
Sure. Right before, when I was living in Charlotte, but before we sold to Salesforce, I had a guy call me up and say, oh, I've got the greatest idea for Jigsaw 2.0. And I was like, yeah, well, you can tell it to somebody else, because I'm about done with Jigsaw 1.0. But he was persistent, and he actually flew down to Charlotte, you know, at one point when we were in OtherScreen, you know, so we could have a sort of an afternoon-long strategy session, and he kept lining up goals and knocking them down, and basically he was trying to attack sort of the contact problem, you know, that for consumers, you know, it's your contact information is never up to date, you know, especially on your phone. You know, and it's like sometimes you'll be driving and you're like, I know I have this person's information somewhere, maybe in LinkedIn, maybe I wrote it on a piece of paper, you know, maybe I've got their card in my car, or, you know, I have it somewhere, but it's not right here in my phone. And he wanted to put together an intelligent contacts management application, mobile app, that connects to LinkedIn and all these other applications where you might have contact information, and to keep it continually up to date and actually make suggestions that come from a combined database, just business information, sort of like Jigsaw, that for individuals. And then I started talking to him. I became an advisor after about a year. I put some money into it. Then when he got Growtech to do a round of VC funding, I participated in that round. And then he pivoted a little bit, definitely at my suggestion. I was like, look, you're not going to make any money on, people won't pay for apps. People aren't going to pay for a contact app. There were all sorts of apps out there that purport to do the same thing, and people just won't pay for them. But businesses will pay for you to keep their business information. I know a thing or two about that. And so now what CircleBack is, we closed down OtherScreen. I let this guy lure me up to DC, where the company's based, to meet some of the other investors, and he basically put the squeeze on me to join full time. And I did, because I believe in the idea, and the idea is sort of morphed into, we own a portfolio now of apps that we've either bought or have developed, all of which deal with contact information. The most popular one is ScanBizCards. It turns your phone into a business card scanner. So lots and lots of data goes through this. So we now give it away for free, but we're able to access all that information. And we're building this sort of big database in the sky, if you will, sort of like Jigsaw, that we are now monetizing.
Awesome. Well, looks like we're getting close on time. I want to open it up. If anybody has any questions for Garth, feel free to ask. Go ahead, Andrew.
Do you think it was for the 1 year trip you took off? Do you think it was coincidence when you came back that Jigsaw idea came and you were ready to jump on board, or do you think that it was kind of a result of standing on top of Machu Picchu or something like that?
No, and actually it was the opposite of that. It was very much a reaction to the circumstance. It wasn't like, I really didn't, I don't want to say that I'm not motivated, because I'm obviously motivated, but I never had any big dream to be run a company, a lot of these guys are just like my co-founder, Jim, he's like an idea a minute. And I used to always say, I'm like, every day was Christmas for him at Jigsaw, because he got to run Jigsaw and it was awesome. And I'm not going to say it was just a job. I mean, it's definitely the best job I ever had. But, at its very core, it was like, if someone dropped, $10 million on me, I'd be like, have a good time with Jigsaw. I got lots of other things I want to see and do. And, I'm very active in my kids' lives. And, there's just lots of things to do besides work when it comes right down to it. And that's not a great thing to say in front of a big startup thing, but it's true. And it was very much a circumstance, that, I won't say there was no soul searching when we're traveling. In fact, a lot of the places we went, we were just like, could we live here? What would that be like? And we ultimately decided that no, that wasn't something that we wanted to sort of undertake. Because it really wasn't real life. We're walking around Indonesia or Cambodia or something. I've got more money in my backpack than everyone in the village. That's not really real life. But when we got back, the situation was such that it's like, I'm like, if I want to live the American dream, I'd just gone through a 10-year period where I had a ton of money. I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. I had a rent-controlled apartment. I didn't have super expensive tastes, and I was like, I'm fine. I got tons of money. And then all of a sudden it was like, wow, I don't have enough money to do what I need to do. It's like, have a house, own a portion of it, have kids, take 2-3 weeks of vacation, travel a little bit, and not just be up to your eyeballs in debt. That's like a $300,000 a year proposition in California. Arguably, depending on it was a fact of life. It's like I needed to Plus, there was an element of, I wasn't particularly fulfilled being it's fun to say, you're like, I'm a mercenary, I'm coin operated, I don't care about, I go from company to company and, just take your money and move on, but it's not very fulfilling, and it wasn't great, it certainly never elevated beyond sort of job with okay people, job with really cool people, job, and, and this was a shot to do something, more fulfilling. But it was the financial reality, and also the way we came up with the idea. It didn't like come to Jim in a dream. There was a lot of kind of work behind it, and we sort of hand cranked the idea into. Now once he got going, he did sort of spit the thing out, and it was pretty awesome. But it was very much the former, not the latter of what you said.
Sure.
Hi. Thank you so much. I'm Jerry. Enjoyed everything, and it's been very cool to hear about all of it. One of the things that you said a number of times was that things just kind of came together. There were highs and lows, but things just kind of came together. Mm-hmm. Do you think you will find that lightning in a bottle again? Can you find another startup where everything will come together like it did for Jigsaw?
I think so. I don't think that I'm ever going to be that early to that disruptive an idea. I don't think that will happen again. But so much of it, and this is actually something that I didn't say, but I wanted to get across, so many entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs think that they have an invention. Just like, like I can't tell anybody, this is lightning in a bottle. I just need to release this baby and money's going to fly down. And that's not how it works. So much of it is in the execution, is in the doing. And also, we didn't have any particular super knowledge or vision about this is where the market's going or whatever, and I call it whack-a-mole. So much of it was whack-a-mole. You're like, okay, this is what happened today. I guess we should do that. We should definitely fire that person. I'm exaggerating, but there were just so many things that were like, there's no primer for this. And it's like we had our board, that supposedly was going to be, supposedly supply us with all this advice or whatever. And they, we had one data guy, we had one, he was the most useless. We had one enterprise software guy, we had one chip guy, and then we had one like search guy. And they were just like, SaaS model selling data subscriptions, in the B2B world. They were like, I don't know, I missed that day. And there's no book for it. So we just had to go through and do what we thought was right, and definitely make learn from mistakes quickly. Try to be attuned to. One of the challenges that we had is we made a lot of gut level decisions about what salespeople needed, and I say particularly Jim, but I'm like, you forgot what it was like to be a salesperson. You became an entrepreneur like the day we started, and I like to think that I retained my I was the idiot tester for most of the technology, because he was so wrapped up in it. He's like, oh, they're going to love this, and this is going to be awesome, and every sales guy thinks like this, and I'm like, no sales guy thinks like that. And I'm like, that isn't awesome. I'm like, and I don't understand what that is. And it's like, and if I don't get it, no one's going to get it. So there's so much more. It's all in the execution, in the grind, the startup grind. It's like, I don't know. It's not magic in a bottle, and there's good news and bad news to that, right? It's less up to chance than you think. So, do I think that I'm going to be associated with another successful exit? Yeah. I mean, if I didn't, I wouldn't be doing it. It's like I don't like taking calls at 10 o'clock at night from an irate CEO, for fun. But it's all in how you just continue on, and you keep going. And you learn from your mistakes, and you keep an open mind. First and foremost, I mean, it's just people that are trying to, I think this is the way the world works, and therefore I'm going to just, put a pan on my head and run into the same spot on the wall every day until it breaks. It might break, but, you're going to be multiply concussed, And it's much better if you can actually take feedback and give up your, don't get emotionally invested in certain things, and just be like, try to be as use the data that you have.
You mentioned you guys started this when you were a bit more seasoned. something like that.
Right.
And as a result, you had some financial realities to face. Did you get pushback from your initial investors and your VCs on being able to take a salary and being able to manage that process at all?
Nope, no, not at all. Because they don't want you to be stressed out. You know, they want you to be focusing a 1,000,000%. They don't want you putting money in your 401k. You know, they don't want you saving money. You know, but they want you to be focused. And in fact, I mean, I've talked to VCs that have said the number one reason, you know, you can say all you want about whatever vision, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, the number one reason that companies get their first round of funding is usually to pay the people. So you shouldn't feel, but it's kind of like going for a school loan. You know, they're going to look all over and they're going to take everything that you have that's, you know, maybe even some things that you think are nailed down, but they don't want you getting rich. But it is reasonable to, you know, to come up with, you know, to say, you know, like some of it is going to go to salaries.
No,
I want to ask, my name is Eric. During the time of the execution, as you said, Morrison execution, I want to know, were there any moment that things didn't really work out as you planned, and if they did, how did you deal with it mentally?
I'm sorry, the very first part of that I didn't quite understand. You mean just as we were going along with Jigsaw?
You said execution, Morrison execution.
Yes.
And I want to know, were there moments that things didn't really work out as you planned? And if they did, how did you deal with it mentally?
Oh yeah, I mean that was like the norm. I mean it's because also we couldn't really visualize, you know, just like, you know, things that were our problem year 5, we didn't, you know, we would have loved to have as a problem year 2, you know, for example. And I'll give you an example. In the first summer when we were in our beta period, we had about 3,000 users, and we were in talks with the VC that was going to lead the second round. You know, Jigsaw, we were getting to stage 2. You know, Jigsaw was going to be able to live another day, and we had a contract marketing guy, and we needed to send out a message to all of our users that we were going to, from now on, it's like you have to pay for Jigsaw, and you would either pay with money, or you would have to put contacts in, or you would have to, tell us that records were wrong. You know, it's like we said it from the beginning. Everyone pays for Jigsaw. Some people pay with their time, some people pay with their data, some people pay with money. So he and I had even said to him, and I wasn't trying to micromanage him, but I was like, look, don't send the email all out at once, because we didn't even have an email marketing platform. We had, you know, he was sending it from his Outlook. And I was like, don't send it all at once, because that'll trigger spam filters. And he was kind of looked at me like, you know, come on, what do you think, I'm an idiot? And so it's about 5 o'clock, and he comes in and is like, and I mean, we're feeling good. I mean, we were right on the verge of getting our next round of funding, you know, $5.5 million. You know, like Jigsaw's taking off, you know, and we're getting a lot of good feedback, and things are starting to feel kind of right. You know, like, oh, wow. I'm glad I quit my $250,000 sales job, you know, that I've been telling my wife that everything's going to work out. And I'm like, I don't really think it's going to work out, you know. And I'm starting to think like, hey, maybe it's going to work out. And this guy comes into my office at 5 o'clock and he's like, I think I just effed up. And I was like, all right, you know, what? And he was like, well, I sent out the email that we sort of agreed on. I was like, okay. I'm like, you didn't send them all out at once, did you? And he's like, well, yeah. And he was like, also, and all of a sudden my phone starts ringing. I'm kind of like, okay, that's weird. He's like, I put all their addresses in the to field. I'm like, oh, you know, I'm like, oh my God. And the reason my email wasn't going crazy is because our spam filter had knocked it out. And so I getting calls, I'm getting text messages, I'm getting, like, Jim comes in from the other room, he's like, what the hell's going on? And, you know, we told him, and we were just like, what are we going to do? You know, and we had a lawyer, which we needed a privacy lawyer from, you know, we were kind of testing the bounds of sort of internet privacy from the start. So we actually, I didn't tell you about this, but we got a lawyer that was sort of on the cheap. He was a trial lawyer from Pittsburgh that had moved to Silicon Valley and wanted to get in and be like a corporate sort of privacy lawyer. So we called him Fixer because we can't pay a lawyer. So he would do all our documents, but he'd also string cable, and he sort of hand coded all our SIC code indexing for the data, and he did all sorts of stuff. So he comes in and he's just like, lock it down, deny, and we're like, no, that doesn't feel like the right thing. That doesn't feel right. And so Fowler sent out an email and he was like, please stop replying to all. And he was just like, this is my home phone number. This is my mobile number. This is my email number. This is my personal email. Please complain to me about this. This is what we did. We screwed up. And there were no sentiment meters then, but if there was one, it went from everybody being like, you guys are the biggest a-holes of all time, to everybody being like, oh, we get it, you poor guys, whatever, this and we got through it. And the next call was to the VC company that was going to lead the next round. And we were fully expecting them to be like, you idiots, okay, we're done talking to you. And they were like, oh yeah, oh, that's a whopper, and they were like, well, what are you going to do about it? And we're like, this is what we've done. This is what we plan to do. We just threw ourselves on the sword in public, and he was like, great job. But, we'll see.
Okay. All right, we got time for Roz, and that's it, I think.
Was the money inside the company the only motivator you had inside the Jigsaw.com? Like you said, you had to buy a house for your family, so you thought...
I would say for me, that was sort of at least 80-20, if not 90-10. There was part of me that was aware that I wasn't particularly fulfilled in my career choice, and a not really wanting. I really did not have a desire to go through and be a sales manager for a bigger company and then be a VP for a smaller company, or just the hours and the churn and I didn't want to carry a bag for IBM when I'm 50 and miss my daughter's high school graduation because I got a deal, so that was a big driver too. I didn't want to sales is a great career, and for some people it's awesome, but I was like, I just don't think this is going to be for me. It was a young man's game for me. It was awesome when I was in my 20s, but business travel and commission and things like that, they become more and more stressful, I think, as you get older. And some people love that, and it's awesome. It's an awesome career, but I didn't want to do it. So there was that driver that I would put at about maybe 20%, and then 80%, I need to make more money. Now, Fowler, I would say it was 20-80. He always wanted to start a company. He always chafed at... He was the sales guy at the company meeting that would be like, why are we doing it like this? We should do this. And getting involved. And, he was always he was much different. He was an ideas guy. He was, I was much more the sort of operator. And in fact, I used to go into his office all the time. He tells the story all the time. That I'd be like, running a successful business is boring. I'm like, especially to someone like you. Because, he's already thought of this idea, 10 days ago. And he's just like, why can't we not do something? And as the company got bigger, he got more and more frustrated because he would think things and he'd be like, okay, everybody on the side of the boat. And I'd be like, no! I'm like, we're still trying to go row this way. And, it's all about, grooving out what you do and being the best at it. And trying to, make smaller and smaller and smaller, sort of adaptations. And, and that's pretty boring to someone who's coming up with all these awesome ideas. So one of my big jobs, especially toward the end, was to distract Fowler so we could get things done as a company. It would just be, I'd be like, something shiny, and I'd be like, hey, we should totally go do this. You should go look up on this on the internet instead of messing around with our developers and our product people. So, who are just trying to, keep the wheels on this bus.
Awesome. Well, I think...
Question. What keeps
Well, I definitely learned something about myself. You know, when we sold Jigsaw, that I didn't make enough money to never work again, but you know, I had money in the bank. I certainly didn't have to jump right into another startup. And so I definitely learned about, you know, it's like I sort of choose this schedule, you know, I take on, and I'm generally interested in hearing what people are doing, and I'm a total sales guy when it comes to my time, you know, whereas I think I can do everything. You know, I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. I'll come to that meeting. I'll hear about this. I'll go to lunch with you. You know, it's sort of my choosing. But, you know, as far as sort of physically what keeps me going, it's like it was at Jigsaw when working out went, I was telling Matthew, like, where working out went from an obligation to a privilege, and that's something that I need to do pretty much every day, you know, to keep my energy level and just to keep my head from flying off. You know, it's a good outlet, you know. But, you know, it's drive. Drive definitely, you know, comes from within. But it's not just like, you know, I'm thinking like you think I'm a money grubber. I'm not a money grubber. You know, it's but you know, that's a driver too. You know, it's like I'm not a things guy, but I'm an experiences guy. You know, it's like we travel a lot. We want to take our kids out of school and travel for a year. You know, it takes money. And, you know, and supporting a lot of people on things that I do. It's like I always want to do more, you know, and it's like, and I have vehicles to, you know, what I never want to have to go back and work for the man. You know what I mean? Like, it's like working in like a political environment where it's like I can't speak out and do whatever I want. And, you know, I'm very flexible with my schedule. You know, it's like I'll work it super early in the morning and I'll screw around in the afternoon. And, you know, it's like having that freedom. I've been doing it for so long that I can't, you know, if someone tries to call me and insinuate like, where were you or whatever, I'm just like, hey, you know, back off, like, it's none of your business. Like, I'll do whatever I want whenever I want.
Well, I think that's a great way to close it. Do whatever you want, whenever you want. So with that said, thank you, Garth.